We're Lauren and Craig, and since 2008 we've been backpacking, campervanning and volunteering our way around the world. Our aim is to have as much fun as possible and live as cheaply as we can, and we've certainly achieved that over the years. We arrived in Egypt, which is our final destination after 2 years abroad. We flew into Hurghada, which is a city on the shores of the Red Sea. It was a little rough on the edges, with abandoned buildings and rubbish all over the floor. But the marina was a complete contrast, and it almost looked like a film set, with the blue sea surrounding it and a beautiful view of the mosque. The main reason we came to Hurghada was to go snorkeling in the Red Sea, so we booked onto a boat trip the next day. The coast can be extremely windy in winter, and today was no exception, and the boat was rocking wildly in the waves. We stopped at a snorkel site where the reef was giving us some protection from the waves, but it was still pretty choppy. Later on, we spotted some dolphins in the open sea and were given the option to swim with them. I'm not a good swimmer, so with the strong current and the big swell, I quickly got swept away from the boat and began having a panic attack. I had to wave my arm for help, and luckily a guy jumped off the boat with a life-saving ring for me. When I got back on the boat, I managed to slip down some wet steps, cracked my elbow open and bruised my bum really badly. It was literally the worst boat trip I've ever been on. We left the Red Sea and headed inland to Cairo, the capital of Egypt. We're not city people, but we spent a full day exploring the main sites of Cairo and visiting the amazing Egyptian museum. You can't visit Egypt and not try the traditional dish of koshari, which is basically spaghetti, lentils, chickpeas and tomato sauce.
Me no. No.
The following day we headed to the Pyramids of Giza, which have been standing strong for 4,500 years. The pyramids are actually royal tombs, so inside there will be a passageway and a main chamber where the king was buried. There were also huge pits in the floor where the oldest boats in the world were discovered. Sadly, they were now used to throw rubbish in. We were getting hassled by the touts and children asking us for photos, so we walked away from the pyramids and up some sand dunes where we got the best view from the top. For just £12 we caught an overnight train from Cairo to Aswan. On our first day we piled into a taxi with some friends and headed to the colourful Nubian Village.
Yalla, yalla. Oh, he's not running.
The Nubians are indigenous Africans that have inhabited the central Nile Valley from southern Egypt into Sudan for thousands of years. Most of the village was painted blue and had rainbow-coloured detailing. The main reason people come to Aswan is to visit the Simbel Temple, which is a 4-hour drive each way, so we had to wake up at 4 a.m. With the Aswan Dam being built, they realised this temple would be flooded, so they used saws and metal wires to cut the temple into pieces and reconstruct it in a safe place. Later that day we headed to the River Nile to do a sunset felucca trip, which is a type of sailing boat they have here. Our next stop in Egypt was Luxor, and albeit we didn't enjoy the city, the sights around it were well worth a visit. Hidden amongst these dusty slopes were the great tombs of Egypt's most important kings and queens. For our first day we rented bikes and headed to the Valley of Kings. When tomb raiding became a popular crime, the ancient Egyptians realised burying their kings in giant pyramids in the middle of an empty desert was just asking for trouble. The Egyptians needed to be more discreet, so they started cutting into these rock walls and building underground tombs. The tombs varied in size from small pits to... The kings and queens were buried with all of their possessions and everything they needed for the afterlife, including lots of elaborate jewellery, so they became prime pickings for the thieves. The Valley of Kings is where some of the best Egyptian artefacts have been discovered, including the tomb of Tutankhamun. The walls were covered in paintings and we were shocked at how well preserved it was. How did they still have colour after all of these years? The tunnels would lead us into a room where the king's coffin was resting. Some of the tombs were closed off, but Craig climbed down to have a peek through the fence. Another popular thing to do in Luxor is visit the Karnak Temple, which is considered to be the largest ancient religious site in the world. They say it took 2,000 years to finish building this temple. The highlight for us though were these huge towering columns which had stories carved into the stone. After 5 nights in Luxor, we headed back to the Red Sea to spend our last few days relaxing. Our first stop was the coastal town of Safarga, which was eerily quiet and felt like a ghost town. On the plus side, it was the first time in Egypt where we hadn't been bothered by touts. We checked into a rather fancy beach hotel and we ended up being the only people staying there. We then made our way back to Hurghada, where we relaxed on the public beach and made friends with all the stray dogs in the area.
There's the other one. Hey!
Hello, girls.
Hey! Yeah!
For our final night in the country, we headed to a fancy beach bar and enjoyed mango daiquiris and a shisha. It's time for us to fly back home, and to be honest, we can't wait. We found Egypt way too stressful with all of the touts bothering us, which is a big shame as the ancient sites are incredible and well worth a visit. So we're happy we went, but we probably won't be returning.